It was a bitterly cold Christmas Eve in the small town of Winter's Hollow. The streets were deserted, save for the occasional flicker of colorful lights strung across rooftops. Snow fell in a heavy, muffling blanket, and an eerie stillness seemed to settle over the town, as though even the wind feared to disturb the night. Claire Harper wrapped her coat tighter around herself as she walked home from the diner where she worked the late shift. The streets were unusually quiet. Not even the distant hum of carolers or the laughter of children could be heard. She blamed the blizzard warnings that had been issued earlier in the day. No one wanted to be caught in a snowstorm. Her boots crunched in the snow as she turned onto Maple Street, a long, narrow road lined with older houses whose once bright facades now seemed dull and worn. As she passed the old Bradbury house, long abandoned, Claire felt an odd prickle at the back of her neck. She paused and glanced up at the darkened windows. For a moment, she thought she saw something move behind the glass of the second-story window. A shadow, faint but unmistakable. Her breath caught. The house had been empty for over a decade, ever since the Bradbury family vanished without a trace one Christmas Eve. The police had scoured the property, but no clues were ever found, and the case grew cold. A sudden gust of wind howled down the street, making her shiver. She shook her head, brushing off the sensation of being watched, and quickened her pace. It was probably just her imagination, she told herself. The eerie silence of the night was playing tricks on her. By the time she reached her small apartment on the edge of town, the snowfall had thickened and visibility was poor. She fumbled with her keys, finally letting herself in and locking the door behind her. The warmth of the apartment was a welcome relief, and she shrugged off her coat, kicking her boots into the corner. Claire's cat, Whiskers, greeted her with a loud meow, weaving between her legs. She picked him up, burying her face in his fur. "At least you're not afraid of a little snow," she murmured. She made herself a cup of tea and settled onto the couch, flipping on the TV for background noise. The usual cheerful Christmas specials were on, but Claire found them grating. She turned the volume down and stared at the flickering lights of the Christmas tree she'd half-heartedly decorated earlier in the week. The feeling of unease she'd felt outside the Bradbury house lingered, a persistent itch she couldn't quite shake. And then the knocking started. It was faint at first, barely audible over the sound of the wind outside. Claire frowned, setting her mug down. She muted the TV and strained to listen. The knocking came again, louder this time, from the front door. Her heart leapt into her throat. Who would be out in this weather? She grabbed her phone and approached the door cautiously, peeking through the peephole. No one was there. The knocking stopped. Claire stood frozen for a moment, her breath fogging the glass of the peephole. She waited, but the street outside remained empty, the snow undisturbed. Just as she began to step back, a new sound reached her ears, soft, almost imperceptible. A faint scratching like fingernails dragging across wood. It was coming from the back door. Her pulse quickened as she moved through the apartment, careful not to make a sound. Whiskers hissed and darted under the couch. Claire hesitated, her hand hovering over the curtain that covered the glass door leading to her backyard. Gathering her courage, she yanked the curtain aside. The backyard was empty. The only movement came from the snow swirling in the wind. The scratching noise stopped abruptly, leaving an oppressive silence in its wake. Claire locked the back door, her hands trembling, and turned on every light in the apartment. She sat back on the couch, clutching her phone. Should she call the police? What would she even say? That she heard some strange noises outside? They'd think she was imagining things. Hours passed and the storm outside intensified. Claire dozed off despite herself, the exhaustion of the day catching up to her. She woke suddenly to the sound of her phone buzzing on the coffee table. Groggy, she picked it up. It was a text from an unknown number. "Merry Christmas, Claire." Her blood ran cold. How did they know her name? Her number wasn't listed anywhere. Her hands shook as she typed a reply. "Who is this?" The response came almost instantly. "Check the tree." Her heart thudded painfully in her chest as she turned to look at the Christmas tree. The ornaments glimmered innocently in the soft glow of the lights. But something was off. A faint rustling sound came from the base of the tree. Claire approached cautiously, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. She knelt down and lifted the tree skirt. Underneath was a small, wrapped gift box that hadn't been there before. With trembling fingers, she unwrapped it. Inside was a Polaroid photograph. The picture was of her, sitting on the couch, asleep just moments ago. Claire dropped the box and stumbled backward, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The phone buzzed again. "See you soon." A shadow moved across the window. The lights flickered and then the power went out. Claire sat in the corner of the room, clutching her phone in trembling hands. Her heart pounded so loudly that it seemed to drown out everything else. Slow, heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway, each creak of the floorboards stretching the seconds into eternity. Claire wanted to scream, but fear choked her voice. All she could do was shrink deeper into the shadows, watching the faint light seep through the cracks in the door. And then everything stopped. The footsteps halted just outside the door. 1 second. 2. Then came a scraping sound like nails dragging across wood. A creak followed as the doorknob began to turn, slowly, deliberately. Forcing herself to stand, Claire's eyes darted around the room, searching for anything that could serve as a weapon. But before she could act, a voice broke the silence, soft, cold, and unnervingly calm. "You've done a fine job preparing for the holiday, Claire." She froze. The voice sounded both distant and close, as though it were coming from every corner of the room at once. The door burst open with a deafening crash, but instead of revealing whoever, or whatever, had been outside, the hallway beyond was empty. Only darkness stretched out before her. "Who are you?" she shouted, her voice breaking. There was no response. Instead, the shadows in the corridor began to shift, creeping into the room like a living, breathing entity. It moved with deliberate slowness, smothering the light as it came. The faint flicker of the room's bulbs dimmed further before extinguishing entirely. Then the voice came again, now directly behind her. "We're just playing. Don't you like surprises?" Claire spun around, but she wasn't fast enough. Someone lunged from the darkness, cold hands gripping her shoulders. The icy touch pierced her skin, chilling her to the core. She screamed, thrashing against the grip, but the figure holding her was impossibly strong. It was barely human, a hazy silhouette formed from pure shadow. Its face remained indiscernible, but its eyes, two empty, glowing orbs, held her gaze, paralyzing her. "You'll be part of our family now," the voice whispered, its tone chillingly casual. The lights on the Christmas tree suddenly flared to life, bathing the room in a brief, eerie glow. In that instant, Claire saw them. More figures emerging from the darkness, a man, a woman, and a child. Their faces were pale, distorted, like blurred images on an old photograph. The Bradbury family. The realization hit Claire like a tidal wave, stealing her breath. These weren't ghosts. They were something worse. The missing family wasn't dead, but trapped, existing eternally in this shadowed void. And now they had come for her. "You're not alone," the woman said, her voice unsettlingly gentle, almost comforting. "We didn't choose this either. But now you're one of us." Claire's scream echoed through the room, but the shadows swallowed it whole. Silence fell. When the snowstorm passed the next morning, the neighbors noticed Claire's apartment door slightly ajar. Inside, everything appeared untouched. The Christmas tree still glowed warmly in the corner, its lights flickering softly. But Claire was gone. On the floor beneath the tree lay a single item, an old Polaroid photograph. In it, Claire stood beside the Bradbury family. They were all smiling.